Everyone. It's on Thursday evening, and I'm here from not sure where you came from. I came from work, so appreciate your time to make time to attend this sharing. So I'm William. I'm actually from Singapore Aftercare Association. I'm actually a seconded staff lah. I have been working in prisons for uh I just got my 20 years medal. Yeah, 20 years already. Time flies. Yeah. So today I will be and thanks for those who are able to turn on video, because sometimes it's good to see some reactions lah. And then what I will do, I think we'll have this chat. So sometimes I may ask you to, if you can type in some responses, and then later I'll need you to do some note. Maybe that's the first thing I need you to do. Hold on, let me turn on. Okay, so what's going to happen is also I'm going to share the slides available in PDF. I'll be sharing this after the sharing. Okay. Okay, so let's just start. Let's just go ahead. Okay, I decided not to use poll. I just decided to use this way. You can either, I would prefer if you can use annotate. You know how to do that? When you go up, there's this bar. There's this thing called annotate, right? And then what I need you to do is to select a timestamp, or then you just choose. So actually among us, most of you are volunteers who have been volunteering with PIES. PIES we are talking about is people with incarceration experiences. Okay, so you all got the message. Okay, good. So if you are 2 years or less, or haven't even started out, yeah, you'll be in the first column. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll move on then. Okay. I need to, maybe what I'll do, if you allow me, just want to take a photo. So I have a moment. Okay, I'll clear this. Okay. Okay, so this is the next question. Some of you maybe have just started. Some of you may have been doing at least 1 or 2 years. I'm just curious, even at this point, before I start, in terms of your volunteering, specifically working with PIES, actually, what are the challenges you have experienced so far? Or at least if you have not started, maybe hearing from other volunteers, what are the challenges you foresee you may experience? This one you can either annotate here, or if not, you can just type in chat. Okay, Harrison, 5 years. Okay. Ming Ting.
Oh, Wei Ming.
Wei Ming. Oh, Wei Ming. Yeah, from Salvation Army, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned aftercare is the biggest challenge. I'm wondering if you can just give 1 or 2 examples.
I think what we have is they are in a in the prison, they are in a controlled environment. So when you want to reach out to them, it's easier. You can of course, once you gain access, it become an easy thing to access. But aftercare is the tough part, whereby I think sometimes it's harder to get them, and then because the additional freedom they have, and then they sometimes they are resolved lah. I think they face more temptations, etc. Yeah.
Because I mean, in a prison is a controlled space, right? But once you go out, there are trials and temptations. And you are talking about actually sometimes their motivation can waver, right?
And there are more challenges as well. Yeah.
And then it's not just about the temptation, but also the challenges and how that affects their motivation as well. And Gil also talks about similar bond release contact and drift away. Okay. Units time. you choose to think maybe they have done well, they are off, they go on their own, but it could be likely sometimes they may run into problems, or they may get into certain high risk situations again. Maybe they may relapse if they are drug users. Yeah. Maybe one or two more, anything else that even if it's not your own experience, but something you have heard from other volunteers or the agency coordinator, you can also share as well. Okay. So you're talking about PI, sometimes when go out, they may be expecting people to help them. Right? Okay. I think it's not just talking about when working with the challenges with PIs, right? But even ourselves, how do we continue to stay encouraged? That's what Wei Ming is saying. Okay, that will just give me a flavor of some of the things that you may be thinking about when it comes to, or your own experience when it comes to the challenges. Let me clear the.
I agree with Wei Ming. Inflated
Yes.
sense of entitlement is that word here. I noticed, they have this victim mentality where they feel that somehow other society owes them something because of whatever they have gone through in life. Poverty backgrounds, and then dysfunctional family backgrounds. And also, I do notice also sometimes, they do have social and human issues when they come out. Some of them, they have not much education, and the thing is, when they go out, there are clients I have where they don't even know how to take the bus, public transport, all that. And they need befrienders, to help them, So these people are, they are so socially inept that when they come out, they need a lot of help. And the thing is, if they can't adjust to society, then back they go in, into the prison. Yeah.
So, who am I speaking to?
Sorry, this is Edward.
Edward. Okay.
Yes.
I couldn't see the. Okay, thanks. I think yeah, this is some of the common challenges we face, right? And sometimes I also wonder the sense of entitlements. I think sometimes when they go out, when they do face a lot of issues, then it could be quite overwhelming for them. So sometimes they also get very frustrated, and they will hope that there will be some immediate help to relieve off their stress. And I think the other thing you mentioned about is actually the issue of sometimes the life skills. You are saying even the basic things, how do you navigate the bus or MRT systems? Right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of them, I noticed they don't even know how to use ATM machine, to draw money, and how to use the, what you call the pay now, all sort of things. So there are a lot of things which they have to learn. And sometimes they're reluctant to learn all this, IT stuff, The AXS machine, they don't know how to learn. I do have a client who has to top up his cash card, because there's a delivery driver, and he's willing to go to 7-Eleven, pay 50 cents to get 7-Eleven to top it up for him, instead of go to the ATM machine to learn. Yeah, he doesn't want to learn how to use the ATM machine.
Digital access. Actually, for myself, I also need to encourage myself to access, to use the digital part. So nowadays, I always depend on my wife. Well, I need to learn because the world is changing very fast. Yeah. Okay, so thanks for the different challenges. So actually what we're going to share today, right, basically is there are these two models which have been quite dominant in this correctional field. Okay, but I don't think what I'm going to share today will be earth-shattering. Perhaps I think as you listen to some of the ideas from these two models, right, how does this actually fit in with your own experience as well? So okay, hold on. Okay, so have a look at this. Okay. There was a period of time when people are thinking, we have a look at this. Fish oil cools anger levels. Have you seen who has seen this before? Maybe you can let me know. Have you seen this saw this article when people talk about, hey, maybe taking fish oils can help you to reduce your aggression level?
First time.
First time. Who has? Okay, the thing is when I flash the slides, I could only see few faces. I couldn't see everyone. So maybe you can also indicate in terms of chat. Okay, so I think there has been always different. Actually, there has been a lot of approach. People are thinking, hey, how can we actually really help pies to change and help them to actually not go back to drugs or go back to their criminal behavior? Yeah, and there are different ways. Fish oils, And overseas, sometimes they try pet therapy. Actually, there are many different ways of trying different approaches. I think at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is actually how can we effectively work with eyes to promote change? Basically, that's what we want, right? Yeah. And because I mean, historically, there are times when people, actually, I won't say even historically, even now, of course, sometimes we doubt whether the things that we do are actually effective. But that's especially maybe from our own anecdotal experience when I've been working with this guy for some time. Then actually, after a while, he went back to use drugs and come back again. So sometimes we may feel discouraged. So inevitably, we may always think about, hey, whether he goes through this counseling or goes through this group therapy, does really help? Is it really effective to promote change? Of course, the thing about is that if we don't continue to think about how can we be more effective, the question is there a better alternative? So what we have been seeing now in US, US is actually one of the countries with the highest incarceration rate. It comes to a point where if you see on the picture on the left, it's actually really overcrowded. Actually, in such a situation, can be quite dangerous as well. Because can you imagine all of them congregate together? Yeah. So, but I mean, if you can't rehabilitate them effectively, you end up a lot of them will be reoffending. So actually, the revolving wheel will keep turning back, and they will be keep coming back to prisons, right? Of course, the harm done when they actually go on to commit offense to the victim and the community. So actually, that's why the thing that people are always thinking about, right? Actually, what works? What will actually work in terms of helping ties change? So actually, here there are 4 types of programs you may find overseas or in Singapore. Yeah, actually, based on your research, which one do you think actually is based on research, which one do you think is actually the more effective one? Let me guess. Anyone know what's boot camp? There were also some boot camp for the young people. It's still quite common in US. Yeah, basically boot camp is, as you can see from picture, is really using physical exercise. The idea of drilling discipline to them is one way of helping them to change. So which one do you think, based on the research shows that it actually is actually a bit more effective? Any guess? Maybe boot camp. Intensive supervision basically means that the person is, the whole idea is actually to step up surveillance to ensure the person is really supervised. So there will be curfews, there will be regular reportings. The idea there is to actually, when you have greater surveillance, you can actually discourage the person from offending. So right now, I mean, someone asked whether I can use the voting program. I will not be able to do it now, but maybe I'll just use the chat for time being, if you can put in your answers. Actually, here, what has been quite consistent show is that boot camp actually doesn't really work in terms of promoting change. What I'm saying really traditionally when it's purely really just physical activity. And of course, intensive supervision as well. Of course, intensive supervision, the benefit is that it has a certain boundary. But if it's just purely surveillance and there's no counseling support given, actually it won't be effective as well. So similarly for improving self-esteem, right? Actually, the idea of self-esteem is some people may have low self-esteem, but the research does shows that whether the person has self-esteem or not doesn't really predict offending. But of course, when someone has self-esteem, they may be actually less receptive to work with us. So then it's still important to help the person beef up self-esteem. But just doing that alone will not be sufficient to help the person change. Yeah. And then of course, the other thing is that you may have heard there's a lot of programs, even in prisons, a lot of programs you run is actually based on CBT, cognitive-based programs. Actually, the research shows that if the program is running CBT, basically what they do in CBT is basically counseling that will address the person's thinking, the way they think, so that they will replace those more pro-criminal attitudes. But at the same time, it's also helping them in terms of learning certain behavioral skills, like life skills, to deal with the offending situation. Although CBT is this can be effective, but actually sometimes in certain cases, it can be ineffective because it also depends on how they are being implemented. If say you have a person who runs a CBT has a manual and he just follow like that and not taking into account the participants, how they learn, how they respond, then of course, even you have so-called the best CBT program, it may not work because implementation is very, very important. But having said that, then that's why the pursue the desire to actually to find what works is actually important. And it's in this kind of environment, kind of context when people are asking, hey, actually does rehabilitation works or not? And when people start to lose faith in the rehabilitation, there's actually this group of psychologists. Actually, these two gentlemen they are Andrew and Bonta, and they are from Canada. One of them has already passed on already. Okay. So actually, in the environment when people are questioning, actually, hey, rehabilitation don't really work. And then we have seen the alternative is what? To really lock them up, have more surveillance, which also doesn't work, right? So these two gentlemen and with a group of psychologists in Canada, so they come out with this R&R model, which is really what they try and do is they try to look at all the different programs and services and treatments that are done with pies. And they want to really use very scientific way to evaluate, hey, which one really works, so that they will be able to determine which methods, which kind of programs will work. And that's basically what's their research all about. So I will quickly go into some of the ideas. Okay. Usually they are being known for R&R model because the R&R means something. Okay. So the first R they are talking about, they're saying that if you are to have effective intervention, there are three principles you need to follow. So the first principle is basically the R. And R is basically identifying the risk. Okay? So risk actually answer the question, who should we pay attention to? So suppose I just use a prison context or in the halfway house. Suppose if in a halfway house or prison you have about 20%. And this 20% among of them, their risk of reoffending may differ. Okay. So from the R&R point of view, people with a higher risk will be people you will want to pay more attention to. Second one, N is needs. Actually, when we use the word needs, people will have different ideas, like our basic needs, Maslow hierarchy of needs, but here this needs they are talking about is basically, I'm going to introduce this term called the criminogenic needs. Yeah. But for now, just look at these are basically the needs that you have to target if you want to be effective in bringing down the recidivism. So the first one principle is basically identifying who are these people who need greater attention. But actually, even after you identify this group of person, right, the question is, hey, if there's this individual, you think this person has higher risk, the question is, what aspect of his issues or what aspect of his needs do you need to address? So that's why the second one address what do we want to target for this person. Then the last actually is quite intuitive, right? So the who, what do you want to target? Then the last one is what? Responsivity. Sometimes in this different years of teaching, some people will have, just when we look at needs and responsibility, we have our own ideas. But here what he means responsivity is that how do we address the need in an effective way? So suppose later I will give some examples. Maybe that'll be easier. Yeah, I noticed there are some chats. Any questions so far? I feel that the easiest way is to ask, the way to remember is who we want to help, who we want to intervene more. And then when those people you want to help, what do you want to target for this person? And even what you want to target, is how do you want to do it in a way that's useful? Okay. So when we talk about risk, right? Again, we have also different ideas of risk. So it could be suicide risk or other types of risk, right? Risk of mental health. But in this context here, we are specifically talking about risk of reoffending. So the first one is risk. How do you, when say risk, which one's of high risk? We are basically talking about risk of reoffending. Yeah. So what Andrew and Bonta did is that they did come up with a different way to actually assess based on the risk factors, which later I'm going to share about risk factors. And obviously, the person with more risk factors, the higher this person risk of reoffending. So we will just keep this definition as such. So reoffending risk is basically risk of reoffending. And when talk about needs, right? The other way to look at it, basically, what are the risk factors, lah? Okay. So in terms of, based on Andrew and Bonta, the needs they are looking at that we need to target is basically the criminogenic needs. Okay. And this is quite a mouthful. Sometimes people think, wow, this is quite hard to pronounce. Okay, but basically these needs are these are the risk factors that if you are able to target, you'll be able to bring about a drop in the reoffending rates. And probably maybe at this point of time, in our mind, what do you think, what are the different risk factors that actually can predict a person reoffending? So maybe I'll just go to the next slide, it'll be easier. And perhaps when you look at it intuitively, you think that actually this makes sense. So basically there are 8 needs or 8 risk factors we're talking about. Maybe as you also look at this based on your experience, see whether this fits in. So the first one is the crime history. Okay. So basically the longer the more offending history, the more conviction the person has, is one of the things that will predict the person coming back to prison. So the longer history, the higher the risk. Okay. So this is one of the factors that adds to this risk. Okay. The second one will be basically the person's personality pattern. One easy way to look at this if the person has tend to demonstrate impulsivity, having problems controlling the aggressions. So that's one of also a risk factors. So far, then the other one, of course, so far this is within the individual, right? The third one is also the pro-criminal attitudes. Okay. Basically, it's criminal thinking. Some of them may have certain criminal attitudes, right? Like for example, if they commit an offense, there's a way they will actually justify their offending. So the stronger the person has in terms of the criminal attitudes, okay. So this is also one of the things that will predict offending. And this one I think is something we are all or perhaps not unfamiliar with, pro-criminal associates. So the more the person has in terms of the pro-criminal associates, and perhaps also a lack of pro-social friends, that will also be a risk factor for this person as well. At this point of time, I'm wondering, is there any question? Because I am a bit cautious. Sometimes these things sound like a bit too technical. Okay, maybe I'll share an example. In my line of work, one example is perhaps there's this middle-aged person who is being released from prison, and I'm working with him as a case manager. I'm a counselor working with him. And the person who has quite a lot of crime needs will be a person maybe he's a middle-aged man in his early 50s. And he could have actually, by the time it's up, he maybe have gone through few prison terms and maybe some drug rehab centers. Okay. So he's gone through prisons in and out. Okay. And on top of that, he could be a person who has perhaps quite a strong pro-criminal attitudes because of the things he has learned in the past and could also perhaps because of his gang associations. And usually by this time, their relationship with their family members maybe not be that strong, maybe a bit distant. And the only social support they may have would be their fellow job friends. Okay, and perhaps at this point of time, they also don't have any other friends that are deemed as pro-social. Pro-social means in this context is people who actually have not committed offense. Okay.
I think there's a question, William, from Daryl. Has it ever been a possibility that the risk is more a lack of esteem due to the inability to create the sense after incarceration, while reoffending is a possible act?
If I may try and explain a little bit
yes,
further.
Please do.
So it's like, we go to the army. We spent 2.5 years being framed up in discipline, in processes, in delivering whatever is being a command given to us or an order given to us. Now, reintegrating into the organization, into society, could be a lot more difficult, given that, I mean, in the army, we spend 8 to 5 or something of that sort, but in incarceration, you don't have exposure to the external world. And therefore, this unfamiliarity with what is that concept of esteem outside there lead to, I don't know, a side effect of, well, maybe getting back in there would be more helpful to because I'm more familiar with what it means by esteem in that same safe space. So I look at that esteem as, would that be more important? And I think back to Jill's question, which was, how do you then define the needs? I think that's a really good question. How do we define the needs of people within and after?
I think in short, what Daryl trying to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Daryl. I think you're trying to say that one had been institutionalized, right? Their mental frame has been institutionalized, and they might have difficulties to see things at a different point of view once they're being released from the control environment. So, Mr. Williams, so what do you think about that?
I mean, definitely when a person goes through prison, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand your questions differently. I'm gathered is that, I mean, when a person goes through prison, definitely there's what I call a prisonization process, and it's a very different environment compared when you're outside. So I think I'm just thinking your question is when the lack of self-esteem is where they get their esteem from also. And very often when they're out, it also depends who are the social support they have. And because at the end of the day, it depends who are the ones who also reinforce their self-esteem. Right? And very often for a person who has, if he has been considered a higher risk of reoffending, right? Generally, the peers that may have is people who are similarly who are either drug users or pro-criminal associates. And that is a kind of the reinforcement they will get from their peers. Okay. But maybe back to the question of the needs, right? So actually what this R is about, right? Because earlier I've said that this is what Andrew and Bonta are trying to do is that they are trying to find out, hey, what are the factors that will really predict reoffending? Because what they're trying to do is really trying to bring down the reoffending rates. But to do so, they are looking at a lot of the data. You see what they are doing is like what insurance agents do, right? Basically looking at the big data. So they look at different characteristics of the individuals, the environment. And then they have actually found from their research, they actually established that actually there are 8 risk factors. But how they phrase it is that instead of calling risk factors, they actually call it needs. So actually, as I said earlier, the way they define needs is very different from what we would normally think needs are. So that's why I was saying that another way to look at this 8 factors which are listed here is from their research. They found that actually these are 8 risk factors. And if the more the person has in terms of these risk factors, the higher will be the person risk of reoffending. Of course, in terms of practice, there's a way to actually assess. I mean, there's a way. Actually, there's a risk assessment tool that practitioners they actually do use to assess.
Mr. Daryl, you think Mr. William answered that question?
I think it's also answered, Jill, when you're asking about needs.
The needs, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, how does that fit in with your what you're saying about the needs?
I guess it's not how I would. I think it's like reframing what I think about as needs. It seems like you're actually talking about risk factors, because when I think of need, I think of something that I can then do in response to identifying that.
Yeah.
Whereas this seems to be more about isolating and identifying particular triggers to see if there's something you can do about it, which is a kind of probably a broader understanding of what I would consider, like need, hunger, food. I'm sort of being quite, analog, sort of quite simple about it. Whereas I think that this assessing risk factors is it's a little bit more grey, and I suppose my need would just be to I was trying to understand it in more sort of simplistic terms, but I think it's more complex than that in terms of kind of looking at these risk factors. And then the question is what one does, because these are more grey and a bit more sort of fluid. What would I then do about some of these things? I suppose it's complex, isn't it? And I want it to be simple. I think that's it's not. So yeah. I think I just need to change in my head, just change it from need to risk factors or something like that, and then it makes for me more sense. But that's just me.
I think maybe on hindsight, when Andrew and Bonta comes out with these terms, right? Maybe you have to rethink that when you use the word needs. It's true, all of us have different ideas. And very often, I think Karen was saying that, someone may, when talk of needs, we generally think of Maslow hierarchy of needs. The basic need, the survival needs, the self-actualization. But actually here, what they are talking about is actually, and again, that's not their opinions. Basically, what Andrew and Bonta is doing is they're letting the data speak. So as they look at the research, looking at both females and male highs, right? They're able to establish that there are certain common things that actually do predict. What this means basically is that suppose actually, and you look at it, it's also not that difficult to understand. Obviously, when a person has substance abuse, you will know that will actually add on to his risk, right, of reoffending. Or if you look at and sometimes we always talk among ourselves, we know that if a person he goes back to his gangs or go back to his drug friends, and he doesn't have any other pro-social support, without any big mentors or befrienders, you know that this person risk this aspect will also add on to his risk. So that's why I'm saying, even if you look at the whether you call it cream needs or risk factors, it does make sense that you won't be surprised that these are actually considered risk factors, right? Like the pro-criminal attitudes, the stronger the person has in terms of pro-criminal attitudes, the higher it will lead to in terms of his risk. Then, but after the question Joe was asking that, although we know this is a risk factor, then the question is that what is the application for me, right? And I think it means differently for different people. So it's from say if it's from helping professionals, working with them, because I'm a case manager, right? And a case manager working in the community, handling the cases, doing counseling. So then these are things that are actually quite important for me, right? Because if it's pro-criminal attitudes, these are things that I can engage him in this conversation and trying to find out his way of thinking and how we can actually support him to think differently. And we also know that in terms of like, if the person really feel, actually sometimes when they want to come out with change, one thing that we observe is that actually they may want to cut off from their friends, from their old friends, okay? But the question is that when they cut off, they may not have any pro-social peers. So sometimes what I do is I will actually actively encourage them, hey, why don't you go to Sana and join the support group? And I have a client who actually went there. So these are the way that we can do. So as volunteers, it's also for us to think about. So even if you know these are the risk factors, what are things that I can do as a volunteer to help highs? And which is actually a question we have later on, we can discuss about it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Mr.
In terms of framing it as needs versus trigger, what's the term that they use? One is need, the other one is what's the word? I just missed the word. Gil was saying instead of needs, it's
risk factor.
Risk factor. So in terms of you having a mindset in terms of needs versus risk factor, does it affect in terms of your counseling with the other party? I'm just curious whether you tried that understanding. You know what I'm saying? Because risk factor
thinking of-
sounds negative, whereas needs is like something that he needs to, is helpless about it, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether if that framing of the mind affects your approach and counseling. I'm just curious, basically.
It's a very good question. Yeah. That's why actually, I think perhaps I go through this, even though I didn't finish, right? You probably will have already have this sense that this R&R model, as some people may actually comment, is a little bit more deficit focused. Because what they are concerned about is whether this person will reoffend. Right? It's not talking about whether this person will go on to live a more productive life, more pro-social life. That's not what it's talking about, right? It's about whether this person will reoffend. Yeah. So it does, Jimmy, are very sharp. It does if you are very into art and you're just focusing on the risk, sometimes you will be very concerned about risk mitigation. And you'll be trying to maybe put more surveillance, try to control so that you won't go into reoffending. Yeah. That's why later on I will also share another model, which is the resistance, which looks like this issue from a very different angle.
William, I also want to just maybe share my views
Yes.
about the risk needs responsibility model. So in Canvas itself, actually, I do apply this CRIM needs model, although we actually never say it so outrightly. Say so, because actually they are very good in terms of telling us what are the indicators. These are a bit of like the kind of behavioral indicators or the kind of environmental indicators that tell us that this person is in danger. Like, for example, if the family relationships are no good, for whatever underlying reasons, the family relationships are no good. If it's no good, it's a good indicator that this person may be at higher risk. Or for example, if this guy is not under employment or education, for whatever reason, again, the underlying reasons are not being addressed, but we know that it's a good indicator, as well as the fact that he's got no pro-social community around him. His friends are like he's being cut off, like what you mentioned earlier, and that's a good indicator. Again, it could be due to what Daryl say, lack of esteem or whatever reasons. It doesn't address the underlying reasons, but it tells us and indicates to us that this person is at higher risk lah. So in that sense, it's good. But how to address it then is a challenge lah.
Yeah, but I think some of the how we intervene is already something we also. That's why I'm saying this model is also quite intuitive, because if it's like friends, right? It's how do you also find an alternative social network? Although easier said than done, and that's why there's so many of us now coming to looking at the mentoring, befriending, social support. Right? And then of course the other aspect you look at here, which is in this screen here, is the school and work. So that's why there's also a lot of effort to continue to help them to build employability skills and to ensure that they stay in the workplace. And I think, well, of course, these are the risk factors, and different stakeholders play different things, right? So I think as a volunteer, you may not need to go and help him to apply for a job, because that would be a job coach role, right? But as a volunteer, maybe sometimes we can find out if they're working. It's also time to encourage them and help them, because sometimes they do face certain problems at work and they don't know how to deal with it. And it can be quite anxious, anxiety provoking for them, or having some issues with their supervisors. So these are the ways we can also help them. And the question why we helping them, encouraging them to stay in work, because from this model, we know that actually being gainfully employed or being gainfully employed either in work or study is actually very important. So I was reflecting on this, right? I was thinking it is actually, we're doing this for volunteers. Actually, I think that's why I think although I share this as a model, the R&R, for us, I don't think we need to be so concerned about the risk, because it's also not for us to go and analyze like this person got 2%, this person got more risk. We will not want you all to do that. Yeah. But of course, from prisons, what they do is they do have a way to identify people of different risks. The main reason is because it's also about the resources and also how you want to ensure that those who with more needs will be given more help. So that's the main idea. But I think for us, when we are doing volunteering work, we don't have to actually go and say have to select who we want to give more attention to. Right? Whoever with us, we just need to pay attention and give our best. But I think, so what will be more useful is that having a general understanding that from the research, it does shows that there are certain things that is important for a person to have in order for the person to change, which are these factors here. So I think that's also a way to reframe, instead of saying that these are things to help people re-offend. Another way is that for a person to change, it's important for a person to have a leisure, a very constructive way of leisure and work, family support. If there's no family support, certain social support is important. But of course, also very important, like abstaining from substance abuse. And other things will be like the way the person thinks also. So that's why I'm saying some of these terms you use in the correctional setting is not something you use in the public or mainstream. Yeah. So thanks for raising this so that we have clarity that actually what this is all about in terms of premiums. Maybe I'll just move on now. Maybe you can have a look when you're back, because I'll be sharing these slides with you. So as I was saying, these are the premiums, and as I say, this is based on the in simple words, big data, where they find that this is applicable. And for information, this also applies in Singapore context, because we also adopt this model, and it does predict. Okay, and on top of that, that's why they different. If there's cream needs, then they also say that hey, there's also another type. It's called non-cream needs. But me, what I just want to highlight here is that other than those needs, or I call it factors, that directly lead to offending, it's not that in terms of when we want to help, you don't just pay attention to cream. There are also other things you may want to pay attention. And these are what we call here the destabilizers. And these are some things, again, we may be familiar with. So for example, when a person, I think it's also when you were talking about challenges, some of you actually mentioned. So when a person is being released, right, into the community, what are the immediate things the person needs to have? If not, the person will not be able to start having a normal lifestyle. Okay, it'll be things like what? Generally, when the person out, make sure the person has
Money.
financial. What else?
Handphone.
Handphone. Okay, can sell your crash program, right? Handphone. What else? Stable housing, clothings. Yeah. So these are some of things, and the other things could be the mental health. If a person, for example, is actively having depression or anxiety, so it's also very hard for a person out there to be able to start reintegrating and resume his life, right? And these are some examples. Earlier, I also say it's about stable housing. If the person doesn't have a place to stay, is homeless. I used to have a client who stays in the Farrer Park tennis court. So it's very hard for them to actually stabilize. That's why this term called destabilizers. So in just what I'm saying here is that
actually I find
yes,
sorry, I noticed the pro-social support is very important. I mean, earlier on you mentioned defenders and support groups and all that. I mean, oftentimes we tell them we must dissociate ourselves from negative peers, those drug takers, all these other things, And then when we do that, we starve them emotionally because you don't have friends, right? Okay. So, I mean, they let go of their old friends. Then where do they find the new friends? So in that sense, actually, you don't mitigate the risk. Sometimes, you actually heighten the risk because in that case, one fine day, they're so emotionally starved, they go on an emotional binge. Then they relapse back to drugs, So sometimes I find that this happens. And without the pro-social community, the risk is still very high for them. How are they going to dissociate from their old friends and become friendless, Yeah.
I mean, I really like your observation, and I agree with your observation. That's why sometimes even like drugs, right? You ask them to quit drugs, right? But the question is, drugs does serve a certain purpose in his life, right? It's a way of helping the person to cope with whatever issues he's facing. So if you are asking a person to take out the drugs, what would be the alternative, right? So similarly, if the person doesn't have, which is very common when the friends are mostly from gangs or from drug using community. And if you ask them to cut off, because that's the first thing they also, actually when you work with them, that's the first thing they'll say is, I'll cut off from my friends. But realistically, how long can that last, right? Even if they have family support, that may not be sufficient. So I think having a social support, having a community to support them is actually quite important. Yeah.
And I also noticed that some of the people who come out, when I ask them, what are your hobbies, then they'll tell you, what kind of movies you like to watch. Horror movies, and what kind of hobbies you like, or rock climbing, windsurfing. They like all these adventure things because actually they are looking for the positive high to replace the negative high from drugs, So this is the way they cope. So
Which may
I
not be a
don't know,
bad thing,
hobbies
right?
and all that, is there any way, and the thing is, could we navigate around this area, see how, organizing such activities can actually help them, I don't know whether this is a good idea or not. So, yeah.
But see, Edward, as you are sharing this, right, I'm glad that you share your experiences. Actually, I think among here, some of you, I do know some of you that have been around for quite some time. So actually what you're saying, right, it actually fits in with also what we are talking about, the risk factors. Sometimes you don't just need the big data to tell us, but anecdotally, you also know. So I say intuitively, you look at this, you won't be surprised these are the risk factors, right? And what you have mentioned is actually the leisure, right? Actually, so it's not just about all work and have family support, but it's also your leisure, how you spend in a way that's pro-social is also important. And another thing about leisure is also because it's an avenue for you to know more people. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, let me know how am I in terms of time. Okay. Maybe I just want to move on to the other model, but okay, the other one I just talk because the purpose of here today is actually to just share what are the two dominant models. Okay, so the first one we talk about is the R. So this is the third R. As I say, it's about not just what you need to treat. We have identified those are the things, but the question is how. Which I you're also saying, how do you help them into have leisure in a way which is actually more pro-social and to replace that the high they can get from the drugs. Okay. So in terms of this principle, basically they are just looking at the few things they look at, and I think this is what I said earlier. Firstly, it's also looking at motivation. Okay. Have the person having, for example, the person knowing, even if you know the person has certain needs or he has certain pro-social, pro-criminal friends, right? But it doesn't mean the person has the motivation want to do things differently. So one thing that in terms of responsibility, they pay attention to is actually the motivation, not just motivation to change, but whether the person is also ready to have engagement with us as well. Be it whether I'm helping professionals or whether I'm a mentor or a befriender. Okay. Then the other things they find that if you really want to help the person change, things I think we did talk about earlier. Someone talked about the taking the bus, right? So it's also teaching them basic life skills to navigate. And the other one, of course, is also to challenge some of the thinking. Because we did say that one of the pro-criminal, one of the risk factors is actually the pro-criminal attitudes. Okay, I'm looking at time, we have 8:30. I'm not sure whether we want to do this now or we just move on.
This, yes, I think this makes sense to me. Because it's sort of chunking it down into little bits that because I think sometimes as a volunteer, rather than it being my sort of profession, and I think this idea of just sort of breaking it down into more manageable chunks and then selecting the one that I can help with rather than thinking, I think the desire is to try and help with everything. Obviously I can't. And that was one of the big things that I learned. And then I think that identifying the barriers is really key, and that goes back to that sort of the risk assessment, and just chunking it down into these smaller, more manageable parts for something that is going to be the most meaningful for that person. And I think that really makes sense. That's the slide that
change. I was wondering how we actually bring it about. I mean, I think some of you use MI, motivated viewing, right? And I think the power of visualization, I think is very powerful. So, I mean, some of them, they really cannot visualize a different future because they see, there's so little hope in them, So, I mean, I don't know how do you all, encourage this, them to actually visualize, that different future, that they can, come up to, you see, So what tools do you all use normally? I mean, other MI and visualization.
We are not talking a bit about the practice lah. Actually, I do think that one thing I think quite important is really work with the person's aspirations. It's never always working about the aspiration is to not go back to prison. Yeah, because that is a bit more it's a negative connotations lah. But rather, what is something that person can look towards, right? Look forward. So actually, the one thing that I always pay attention is what's the person's aspiration. Actually, everyone has aspirations, whether you are in the 30s or 40s. But sometimes it may be something. It doesn't have to be very lofty. I have clients. The aspiration is just to, because of the past hurt he has done to his families, right? Just want to be a good husband and father. And I think it's important to then how can we support him to play the role as a father? So so it is not so his first thing is actually his aspirations and motivation. But at the same time, it's also about having that skills as he wants to live up. I mean, play the role as a father, his parenting, fathering skills. Yeah. So actually, one aspect is really to pay attention to aspirations. But I think there's not just that, but sometimes they also need other supports. I mean, we don't, as I, yeah, from what Jill was saying, right? Actually, don't have to be so complicated, but sometimes even as we human, person to person talk, right? Really, sometimes just being interested, finding about what's their aspirations, what motivates them. Yeah. But of course, sometimes they do face a lot of this discouragement because of what I've experienced in the past. So we need not go and do all the MI techniques. Yeah, I mean MI techniques, they talk about pros and cons and things like that. But I do know that in there are some trainings offered under dog training. So actually, I mean today what I'm covering is just really the basic, just general ideas of what are the rehab approaches. Doesn't really talk about rehab practices under dog. Let's talk about how do you actually challenge the thinking. They talk about CBT. How do you motivate? They talk of MI. More useful for everyone.
Okay.
Maybe let me just quickly go to the other, because I think we need to have a balance, because I think, as I say, I think the R&R effect, what I'm getting, sometimes it looks too technical and too professional, because I don't think that's our job. We signed up as a volunteer to do risk assessment and classify people. That's not our job. We are here to love and to show support. Maybe before that, let me just quickly talk about summarize, because we talk a lot about R&R. I think basically, as I say, we don't have to, I did say we may want to pay greater attention, but this may not be something we as volunteers would need to do. But one thing that's for sure is that with a person who is working before us, it's also quite important to pay attention to as many crimes as possible. And as I say, those things as you look through is quite intuitive, right? I mean, you know that this person would probably need a job, will need leisure, things like that. But of course, I think it doesn't mean that me as a volunteer have to actually make sure all these needs are being tackled. I think you just do whatever is within your means, right? So suppose if you are a person who is like no canvas, you all actually help the person apprentice an art, right? So maybe that's one way to build up the leisure, right? Or even as a form of employment. So actually, we can just focus on that, because there are other aspects which is being taken care by other people as well. Because we are working as a community. It's not as though I have to be one person to settle everything. So that's not the idea we're having here. Okay. I think I just want to focus the other thing, in terms of practice we're talking about it, right? Actually, interestingly, you look at the science, actually, there's also, again, not very earth-shattering ideas. But if you look at this, it's quite consistent with we've also with the counseling literature they're talking about. At the end of the day, it's about building relationship. So whether we're talking about how to help the person, motivate the person, I think first thing first is actually the relationship matters. Yeah. So that's a very important part I want to emphasize here. Okay. Then earlier we talked about the supporting aspirations and motivations. Then the other we talk about. The other thing I'll talk about is also sometimes because we have life experiences, we are able to, being adult, we have our own life skills. How do we problem solve? How do we negotiate with people? Sometimes if we can, when the guys they were sharing about their issues or their challenges at workplace, what we can do sometimes also can share some of this life skills that we have learned, because it's something that they may need as well. So that'll be the summary for the R&R. Okay. So I don't think I'll go through everything here, but I think one thing to, as I was saying, the resistant approach is another way of looking at things like the issue of offending and change. And most people may actually prefer resistance compared to R&R. Yeah, because R&R is looking at the offending. So one way to explain is to use the metaphor of a plant. So basically, for me, I don't have green fingers. Okay, I'm not very good at growing. Okay, but I think this is a very useful example. So R&R basically is about looking at what are the factors that will actually, what are the risk factors that will actually lead to a plant dying off. Okay, so actually R&R basically look at what are the risk factors that will actually kill a plant. So basically maybe it's over too much sun or too much water. But the system decided to look at another way of another approach. Instead of looking at whether the plants will die, what the system approach is interested in actually is looking at what are the factors in the environment that will actually help a plant to grow and thrive. So that's where the systems is coming from. Okay? So it's a very different way of looking at it, because it's also the way they do their research. I think earlier on, I will just move out. I won't ask you all for response. Okay. So but one thing I always ask, right? What are the ways to know if a person has changed? So earlier on, R&R is just focusing on what? Just focusing on one thing, reoffending. Whether a person will come back to prison in 2 or 3 years' time. But for resistance, they are not just interested in that. Okay, they are not just interested in whether a person stop offending, but they're also interested in this idea of the identity resistance. Okay, again, I can't change. These are the terms they use. Okay, but again, it may sound technical. Okay, but what it simply means here, right? Whether you know a person has changed, it's not just whether a person has stopped offending, but actually it's the way the person looks at himself. He no longer look at himself as a hardcore addict. So when I say I'm a hardcore addict, but instead he look at himself as actually a loving dad. So his identity is no longer looking from a criminal perspective, but more a pro-social roles. So that's one indicator based on the resistance research. The other one is that, again, looks very intuitive. Obviously, when a person starts to change, it is no longer just something it's something when the person changes, the surrounding people around him will also start to acknowledge. So it's what you call the relational resistance also. So how do we know if a person has changed? So it's not just whether a person stopped offending, but when the person inside, he start to look at himself differently. And then people around him also notice that he's different. So that's what it means by how the system looks at change. And yeah, this one I just moved. Because I have the slides, you can actually have a good time to read through, because it's quite easy to understand here. But this is just to say the difference between earlier on the R&R and here. Basically, what they are looking here for the system is, instead of looking at factors where people fail, they're looking at how come some pies can succeed. So they're looking at success stories. So the system is basically very interested in success stories. And how do they do it? R&R actually basically do it by looking at big data, looking at the data and which predict. But here, what they're doing basically is to listen to the stories. So actually, for them, they do a lot of interviews and research, talking to a lot of ex-offenders and practitioners to find out what are the things that happen that help them to succeed. So this is a very different way of looking at the issue of offending and change. Okay, I'm mindful some of this may be technical, so if any questions, please do raise. Harry is helping me to monitor, right? So these are just the different types of research they look at. So they look at how some people mature over time, they can actually stop offending. They also earlier said that they also people look at how people, the way they look at themselves, how they transform from a very criminal to a pro-social way of looking at themselves, and how that promotes change. And this one is basically social. They also look at how the social environment, the presence of social support, and specifically family members and friends promote change in a person. So these are the way they investigate. The other one is also looking at space. So basically, for example, if a person stops going to the bar and and I mean, he used to go to a bar and hang out, versus that he has a stable job. Instead of going to a bar, he now goes to a park with his children. So even being in different space can promote change actually. So these are things they're looking at. But I think let's talk about the application which is more meaningful and useful and interesting. Okay. So actually they do go and study quite a lot of people. They look at people who change, people who cannot change. So they go and compare. So they realize they don't have to be confused with the diagram here. It's just to show you that there's a certain process, but maybe just look at the steps here, 1 to 6. Maybe you all can just have a read. I don't have to read it out loud. But when they study, they notice there's certain common pattern. When offenders change, these are some of the steps they go through. So triggers could be things like it could be internal or external. Sometimes some common ones when you are when I was working in prison, sometimes things that would change. Unfortunately, sometimes the death of a loved one, or going through a divorce. So some of these things may trigger them, or just simply sometimes coming in again, feeling very frustrated. That can be a trigger as well. But very often, sometimes what I've heard the stories could be their children. Maybe the children making a certain comments that actually start them thinking. So maybe just to I think that's a chat.
Mhm.
I was just wondering whether education level plays a part as well. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
From the desistance point of view,
That's right. Yeah. Just wondering.
I think it's not the education per se, but it's being tied to education institution, because it's about the place where you have ties and relationship. So actually, having association with institutions are important. The education or workplace, right? Because that will create a state in to conform to the rules, right? Because if you do anything contrary or you break the law, then you will have to break away from the institution. So if the stronger you are, say to a certain work, or the higher, and I think education also gives you opportunity to get more interesting forms of employment, and then you have a greater stake in that employment. Actually, then it will create greater conformity to rules. So that's a way to help the person to desist crime. So, I'm not sure whether I answer your questions.
Yes, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
William, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify, when you say that the person of higher education have more opportunities, are you implying indirectly that education does play a part?
I think the idea of education is about having more opportunities.
Oh, okay.
It's about having more opportunities. But Jimmy, do you have something? Seems to have from your. I can read your expression here. What are you?
Thought more on the line that if you have somebody who has like a lower education level versus a higher education level, this desistance may not be that successful in that sense. But you say it's not. But then when you reply, the higher education will allow him more access to job opportunities and friends. So indirectly implying that education do play a part now.
And I say
I'm just clarifying that. Yeah.
Correct. I think the thing you think about is what's the underlying mechanism, right? I think from the education it creates opportunities, right? Because at the end of the day, part of helping, actually I have the slide, that's the later part, which I thought is quite important, useful. Having such diagrams is easier to understand, right? So for basically to help a person to change, right? There are two things we are trying to do, right? One is to work with the person, which is the here motivation and capacity. But actually, from the desistance research, what they show, right? Actually, for a person to change, it's not just based on the person's own endeavor and self-determination. Actually, the whole environment plays a part. And sometimes environment can be both a barrier or it can be opportunity. Barrier could be, for example, even if you have certain criminal records, you go to work, sometimes you can't get the job because there's certain restriction. So that becomes a barrier. But we are not here to say why this barrier is right or wrong. Yeah. But on the other hand, for a person to change, having opportunity is important. Opportunity here means access to resources. And sometimes resources are embedded in the social network. So just like the more people you know, the more lobang you have. And for our clients, what they may not have is sometimes their resources are really sometimes from the pro-criminal groups, which is not something you want them to access, right? So education in this context, if you look at here, it does create more opportunities, right? In terms of getting more resources, and if you have a more stable job, it's also a way to know more people. But of course, I'm not saying I don't think it has to be education as you have to be degree holder or the academic route. Because now you look at the Singapore, how it has evolved, right? It's not just talking about that. It's just talking about different skill sets. As long as employable skills that will give them the chance to secure a stable employment.
I was wondering, is there any correlation between education and your reflective ability, your ability, consequential thinking skills and all that, you see? So I find that, most of the educated ones whom I know, they're able to reflect better, So in that sense, they're able to desist, you see, because they can understand the consequences and reflect better. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. Yeah.
I don't know. In that aspect, it does help when the person has some reflexivity, so they can have insight. Because so it's quite mindful. Education. But of course, it doesn't mean the less educated will commit more crimes. Because we always seen how people educated also commit crimes, right?
On the other hand, it could be a crux on them because you're educated and you still take drugs, that kind of thing. So it could be also negative in a sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully, after today's session, one thing we learn, right? Actually, firstly, the phenomenon of crime is very complex.
Yeah.
It is a combination of both structural issues, right, plus the person himself also. Then, of course, likewise, to help person change, it's also a very complex process. It's not that straightforward. Especially, people who struggle with drugs. It's actually sometimes they do face relapse. It's part of their recovery process. I'm not saying whether it's the right thing or wrong thing, but it is part of a process. And especially what we are interested here when we talk about these things, the risk factors, resistance, we're basically talking about people who actually have been struggling with criminal offending for chronically in and out. We're not talking about those first or second timer. Then after a month, because they will actually, without much intervention, they probably will continue their change. So we're talking about people who are chronically, and what happens is that in terms of their own human self, in terms of the resources within and external, actually is sort of in a more deficit mode compared to others because of the years of incarceration and lack of opportunities. So that's why we are saying that how you talk about education. I think we are going back to this model here, right? Because I thought this is a really easy way to understand that. That's why for volunteer or as a helping professionals, it's also always useful to pay attention to both the person. Right? And here is also spelled out there are two things to pay attention. We talked about that earlier, motivation, the person's aspirations. And what do we do when we want to motivate? Sometimes you can't force a motivation. You can't force. What you can only do is can be a cheerleader and supporter. So they want to work, but then they face obstacles. Is one way you can do is just be a cheerleader, no? Or when they face argument with the wife, then he feel very discouraged. Can be a cheerleader. But the other aspect actually is the capacities part. So this capacity part is also quite important, which we have also said earlier. So you can also see how the two models are integrating, right? In terms of capacity, basically, it's not just about things to deal with the risk factors, like how do you stay away from drugs? How do you say no to friends? But it's also what we said earlier about capacities to live a good life. So earlier, even things like how do you navigate a bus? I have a client who has difficulty, doesn't know how to make an appointment with the hospitals, but he has a swollen leg. So these are things they need to learn, the life skills and how to problem solve. So and how to how to do problem solving, things like that. So this is one aspect. But the other aspect is also, I'd say again, it's the opportunity. How do you actually work with the environment? Which is also important. And I think that's why earlier, I think I have one slide here. Okay. We are here because of Amaze, right? And that's why I'm saying that this opportunity is also not what one volunteer can do, but also collectively, that's why we are trying also to address some of the barriers they face, maybe at work or even finding a job or even a stable housing. This is a collective effort that we need to do as a community.
Is there data to show which one would be a better option, or it's a mixture of both, or it's a pseudo kind of thing?
Which one? You are talking about the two models.
Yeah.
Actually, the one
Very
that
hard
Don,
data to say which is better than the other, or where you purely use R&R and, versus distance, or use a hybrid.
I think the wise one will use both.
yes. Why do you say that?
We should understand all models. All models they cover a certain aspect of certain things. I think they probably highlight certain part that's useful. I think and I think it's crucial we identify the strength and weakness of each model, and then you try to apply those strengths. I mean, so the wise one would know, try to be skillful in using both.
I think, and they are used for different reasons now. So, but the quick answer is that actually it's important to integrate. And actually, if you look at this, these two don't really they are not in conflict. They can actually support one another, right? Even if you look at this, it does cover both R. I mean, when you work with the person, the motivation and capacity, you can still work on things that to mitigate risk factors. I teach him, like in prisons, what they do teach the clients how to do relapse prevention, how to deal with the drug craving. So this is what the prisons they will do actually, right? But on the other hand, you can also teach them certain, and when they're up, we can actually help them to navigate, help them to reintegrate. So these are life skills we can teach them as well. So actually, it covers both. But I think R&R tends to maybe pay not so much attention on the opportunity. So I think what the systems really value at is, again, to remind us that to help a person change, you need to help the person in terms of the environment as well.
So William, actually, I look at it, right? It seems as though the volunteers they need to be quite well connected to the ecosystem, right? Because we look at opportunities and capacities, not everything we can do ourselves, but it's community effort. So the volunteers' knowledge and their own personal connection to a viable community ecosystem is very important, right?
Yeah. Actually, I think sometimes volunteers do something that actually, because volunteers also have your own network and friends, so when you befriend or mentor a pi, right? Actually, over time, you can also introduce the pi to your network. I mean, for example, if you like cycling, right? And this person, he say he's something he's also interested in. So actually, it's a way of grafting the person into your cycling community. And that's why I think when talk about this, one of the key applications was reflecting on this last night I was thinking about this. Actually, one thing is that that's why I also put here I think we work collaboratively because I mean, as a volunteer, you can of course tap in on your own network. But of course, that may not be enough. That's why it's always very important to work with your agencies, wherever you are working with, whether it's the volunteer coordinator. And there are certain things, maybe the agency will have more resources. And that's why earlier on I also shared about the maze, right? Even if there are agencies that can maybe have certain more, for example, I mean, I have someone who aspires to be an artist, then I will probably ask them to go to Canvas, right? That's how we leverage on one another. I think the takeaway is that let's just do whatever we have. Because when I think of this, I'm thinking we are not just an independent volunteer. We are probably part of an agency. Yeah, that's why we're collaborative with your agencies and get the support they need.
Not for every volunteer to build their own ecosystem, to be connected to the ecosystem via their agency and the agency to other agencies.
I certainly feel like the more that I know of all the different things that are available, I feel like I am a more effective volunteer. And something like that, you do have to put a bit of work in, sort of good intentions are lovely, but you kind of, I am a more effective volunteer if like Dr. Livingston said, there's two kinds of knowledge. One is knowing things yourself, and the other is knowing where to find things, or knowing someone else who knows that thing. And I think that's what Lewis is referring to as well, is having access to this. At least I can plug in and be more efficient in having access to this whole bank of knowledge that and as a foreigner as well, I think not being brought up here, I'm not immediately sort of knowing what necessarily the right things are. So it's sort of like, I think, again, not to put people off or anything, but I think I'm definitely a better volunteer if I put in the effort to learn, put the time in to know and really kind of know where to go. And that app that we're trialing is really helpful as well. I sort of go through that and just check things as well. So building out from that is fantastic. This is really, really useful. So thank you.
I just want to highlight, in case you're wondering what's this about, just give me, I just need, I think 20 seconds. Okay, so there's also one more slides here. I didn't, basically, this is some of the practical ways you can do to support resistance. And you read this, it's something we have earlier, some of those things we have said are actually reflected here. So when you look through this, again, because these are to be realistic about the processes. I mean, actually we do that. Some of them, what they go through is very complex. It's not a straightforward path, right? And then we talk about this also, the idea of hope. So which is related to aspiration. How do we build hope? Focus on their strengths, relationships, and also respecting their agency, meaning that sometimes they need to make the call themselves. They need to make the decisions themselves. Okay. But I think what I've done here today, right, is just to show some of these ideas. But actually, this will not give you the practice. I mean, you talk about strengths or how do you do it. So that's something that won't be able to cover in this topic here. But that's something as part of major was saying, part of learning, something we can learn along the way. And as I said, there are some resources available also that maybe you can learn along the way in terms of like motivation. How do you focus on strength, things like that. I think that's all I have for sharing.
I'd just like to add a word about the community that we have here. So I think it's important to come together as a community, and that's what Amaze seeks to do. All the volunteers and mentors and befrienders who want to work together with our pies. I think as a whole community, we can do so much better. So if we are able to bring on board the whole community, the whole nation of volunteers together, actually we are all for the good of it. No one will lose out. Everybody will benefit. And I think there's so much more we can do as a community for ourselves and for others. So do encourage others to come for these sessions and be part of our community that's growing. So I just want to put in that little word.
Okay, thank you and good night.
Thank you.